Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. For me, it's 9 o'clock. I'm in California. My name is Sylvan. Let me pull this up a little bigger. This is a human geography question and answer session, study session. The exam is almost 3 weeks away, but less than 3 weeks away. So I don't know, am I only on here? Okay, I see I've got 3 live attendees, so this will be a rather private meeting. Can I thought I'd invite people in so I could see it face to face. Stefania, what do you think? Can I invite you in and just get a visual of you for a moment before we start? Here you are, I've just invited you. Anybody else who's in here, just go ahead and comment and let's get you on the screen. I think I've not added people to the screen yet, so I don't know. Accepted and connected, so I don't know. Not sure how to get you on here. Anyway, so I have some things I can go through, but this is for you guys to ask questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Oh, there you are.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi. You can mute yourself too. I'll probably just get a visual. Or you can stay on mic if you wish. Anybody else that wants to pop in and join us, just add a comment and I can go ahead and invite you once you've done that. Yeah, so let me I'll go right on through this then. These are the streams for those of you that have that are in other classes. You can see the upcoming streams. AP Human Geography also has a lot coming up. I can show you in a moment. Remember, if you're enjoying Fiveable, to give us some shout outs and likes and everything and spread the word on social media so Fiveable can keep growing. The more users, the more content we'll get. So just keep it going. Thursdays is a big day for human geography. In sort of like full disclosure, the Industrial Revolution, not to discourage people, it's a great topic, industrialization and how it shaped the world and shaped places in it, but that's not a topic covered on the AP exam. So there it is, if you're interested in it for your own knowledge, but now of course there is overlap and you can only bring things in on the exam, but that's explicitly a unit they've said will not be on it. Politics, political geography, however, tonight. These times are all Eastern, by the way, so if you're in California like me, subtract 3, or in Pacific Coast time. Political maps, territories, and boundaries tonight. Then you can see that on Tuesday, but that's for only if you have a cram pass, and same with Tuesday's globalization, and there's also more political geography on Tuesday, so lots coming up on political geography, kind of one of my favorite topics. And then on the 30th, 1 week from today, again, more, and in May, as the exam gets much closer, there's a lot more streams coming, so stay tuned. Okay, enough about that. As I said, today's stream is, I'll really quickly go over the exam format that's coming up. Then it's up to you guys and the questions you have. If you don't, I'll just run through a bunch of stuff. I've got more slides than I can likely get through that I put together in case there was no questions. But let's just jump it right in it. And yeah, no, mostly stuff I set up was population migration and some culture stuff. And with time, I have a few free response in the end. Could you go over how? So I see Andrew's got a question. Yep, so super, Andrew. I will absolutely answer that in a moment. So just in case you haven't seen this, the College Board announced that the first 5 units will be covered on the exam. You can see what they are here. The basic kind of thinking geographically introductory stuff, the population migration, culture, political geography, agriculture, world land use. They've cut out the industry and economic, a lot of the economic development stuff, kind of sad, and the political stuff. Sorry, not political stuff, the cities and urban and cities are out, and industry and economic development. I mix that up because there's a lot of overlap between economic development and politics, as there's a lot of overlap with a lot of these topics. Here you can see the format that they are going to give you, which is 2 free response questions. You can read about them here. The first one you will have, see, now I can't read this because it's so small on my screen. I thought I had a printout somewhere, but I'm just gonna have to make this bigger so I can see it here. Sorry, bear with me. I just need to be able to see what I'm looking at. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, as you see that there's 2 free response questions. The first one is that 2 stimulus question. That is most of your exam score, 55%. The second one, which you'll have a little less time for, is the 1 stimulus free response question. What that means, if you don't know, is they will give you a chart, a map, a graph, a photograph, something that pertains to the questions they're asking, or one of the questions they're asking. Sometimes some of the questions won't have to do with a stimulus. That first question, they're going to give you 2 stimuli. The second one, only 1. And you'll see that you have 25 minutes to answer the first one. You have 15 minutes to answer the second one. It is not entirely clear how many questions you'll have for each one. Unfortunately, they haven't really defined that. I think we can assume it maybe will be less than the 7 that they were wanting, but maybe not, depending on how they expect you to use that time. So kind of, we're all flying a little in the dark, you guys as students, us as teachers. And yep, as Kath just said, there is a separate, I don't have them up there. If you go to well, the streams that are going on in May, I know some of them are for Cram Pass people only, but they get much more into like how to answer the questions and how to go about that. But I can touch on that. Andrew asked, let me just pop this in as a question. Andrew asked, how much do you have to write for a free response question? He says, when I read the question, it seems like it can be answered in a sentence. Often that is true. It really does depend on the nature of the question and the nature of what you write in that sentence, but it is true that there are numerous, and please realize when I say free response question, there are many parts to it. So when I say a question, I'm just talking about one subset of the question. There is no way you can answer the entire free response in one sentence, just to be clear, but each subset sometimes can be answered in one sentence. With that said, you have a lot of time. So I think they give you ample time for these. So don't race through them. Make sure you're specific. And yeah, and like Kath said, I see you guys commenting. That's absolutely true. Amanda's going to go into a lot more detail, but that would be my short answer. Is if you feel you can answer it in a complete sentence, answer it in a complete sentence. If you feel you can elaborate in a second sentence, I encourage you to elaborate in the second sentence. And I'll just leave it at that. So any questions about content? And I'll just give that a minute, and if there's none, so that's a big one. You want me to just go over agriculture? Kath is saying. So okay, that's such a huge thing. So maybe if people could throw me some, you didn't cover it at all. Okay, okay. So I can go through some of the basics of agriculture. Yep, yep. And I'm gonna just have a text in front of me just as my own kind of thing to go through, and then, but yeah, why don't we go ahead and go through some agriculture. Any other questions, just throw them out now so I can kind of organize my time. If people have things they want me to cover, and otherwise I'll do my best to kind of do an agriculture cram. Difference between Malthusians and Neo-Malthusians. I would have to kind of, okay, see that. Any others? Keep them coming, keep them coming. Okay, so I will just keep them coming as I'm talking. Oh, we got an answer coming in here. So, no, so Stefania, I think they've pretty much told us 6 and 7 will not be on the exam. Yeah, it's just the first 5. Okay, so I'll start going over agriculture, and just saving a little note here. All right, I'll try to just go over it. So in a huge nutshell, I would say there are 2 types of agriculture, would be one way to run this down. And please, if there are questions, throw them at me during this. There is subsistence agriculture, which is when people farm for themselves, and as that is how they exist. They need the food they grow or they will starve. We see this in a lot of less developed places in the world, lots of Africa, lots of Asia, people that are simply growing food for themselves. Sometimes if you've had a great harvest year, you might go to market and sell a little of your surplus, but a subsistence farmer really is one who grows their own food, for their own subsistence or survival. The other type of agriculture is commercial agriculture, which assuming, I don't know where people are from, but if you live in the West, this is much more common, where people are growing crops or producing animals for sale on the market, specifically for trade. I live in California. We have a massive commercial agricultural industry. Where I live, strawberries are the #1 crops. We grow over like $1 billion of strawberries in our county. So that is a commercial, and often you see what we call like monocropping, where you just see massive, massive, massive fields of the same crop growing, or if you think about the Midwest, and like corn and wheat and soy and just these massive fields. To add to that, you also have commercial agriculture. This is not just about more developed places have commercial agriculture and less developed places have subsistence agriculture, because you have a tremendous amount of also sometimes the term cash crop is used for commercial agriculture, and you have a tremendous amount of cash crop agriculture going on in less developed places in the world. And here I would think about things like bananas, a country like Ecuador, Costa Rica, lots of Central America, or coffee. You get a country like Colombia, which grows a ton of coffee, or chocolate, cacao, which is nearly all grown in a handful of countries in West Africa, a little bit in Indonesia, Southeast Asia. But these are cash crops that are being grown commercially for sale on the world market. So that's kind of 2 basic types of agriculture, I would say, are commercial and subsistence. Aside from that, just to add, I guess industry isn't in there, so this probably won't be on the exam, but you have this idea of primary, secondary, tertiary economic activities. So really quickly, I'll just say primary activities are people that work with their hands directly in natural resources. So somebody that works as a farmer or in agriculture, picking the coffee beans or putting their hands in the ground or on the animals, or herder. These people work in primary activities. Secondary activities are what we call manufacturing. These people process or turn things into things. There's a huge connection between the two, even in agriculture, because if you think about, I don't know, like the bagged salad mix, which has become such a thing, right? So there are going to be factories where that lettuce is getting bagged. And then tertiary activities are what we call the service industry. So somebody is going to be working for that company or trucking the bagged lettuce to get it to the stores or working in the stores. So in fact, really, if you think about like the impact of agriculture, it's food, it's what we eat, so it's huge. What else where else can I go here? Where else can I go? Okay, so agriculture looks different in different parts of the planet, of course, and the types of food people eat. We call it a staple food if it's something that makes up really the majority of your diet. We've had 3 agricultural revolutions in world history, so there's some overlap with history here. The first agricultural revolution often is associated with the Fertile Crescent, or what we call like Mesopotamia and Jordan, what's now like Jordan and Israel, and parts of Turkey and Syria and Iraq. But also happened in some other places like the Nile and China and Mesoamerica in the Andes Mountains and Papua New Guinea and West Africa. We have a bunch of places that we would call agricultural hearths, which is where agriculture began. And these places began independently, so the idea didn't spread from one to the other. And then from each of these, we see agriculture spread outward and begin to become the primary way people get their food, as opposed to hunting and gathering, which is what all humans were doing if we were to go back, say, 10,000 years. So that's the first agricultural revolution, and it happened, in very over thousands of years, 10,000, 8,000, 6,000 years ago. Then we had what we call the second agricultural revolution, which often gets associated with the Industrial Revolution. So you guys will not be looking at the Industrial Revolution. You can join Harrison on a stream in a couple of hours, and maybe he will touch more on the second agricultural revolution. But those two kind of go hand in hand. It had to do a lot with some inventions like the seed drill, which was created by Jethro Tull, not the band, a farmer dude. And seed drill was able to waste a lot fewer seeds because it planted seeds much more precisely. Also, there was a lot of fertilizer, including guano, which is like bird crap that was being mined in the Americas and then taken shiploads back to Europe to refertilize the soil. So you had really the land was being brought, new seeds. Of course, you had the Columbian exchange crops that had been brought from the Americas. So all these things that were just producing a lot more food. That freed up a lot of labor to be able to move to the cities, which allowed the Industrial Revolution to take place. But it was really just a huge increase in food. Part of that was sort of cyclical. The technological improvements created more food surplus. More food surplus allowed people to leave the farms, which also kind of fed more technology. More technology there was. And chemical fertilizers came on the scene. So it's like as technology created more food, people were freed up. This created cyclical. So that's the second agricultural revolution. And now we're living in sort of the tail end, maybe, of the third agricultural revolution, also called the Green Revolution, which involves is really when a lot of the gains of agriculture began to spread from just the Western countries and became more global. It's associated with a man named Norman Borlaug. Often he won the Nobel Peace Prize for preventing a lot of people from dying of hunger, but it's also rather a controversial thing because the more food there was, the more mouths there were to feed. So all three of these agricultural revolutions I should have mentioned, one of the impacts is just population growth. So starting with the first agricultural revolution, we really as humanity experienced the first population boom. And if I were to ask, like, when did that population stop growing? That's a trick question I always like to ask my students, because the answer is really it hasn't. Ever since we kind of created agriculture, everywhere agriculture takes root, no pun intended, population explodes and it just keeps going. Another piece of agriculture, and just to throw another name out there, there's a man named Karl Sauer, S-A-U-E-R, and he is one who imagined where agriculture began, and what he's somebody that made a determination where the first agricultural hearths were, and he mapped them around many places of the world. I don't have these images up, but you could look up just a map of Karl Sauer on Google, or it's likely in your textbook, and see where he argued plants were being. I will share the URL of my slideshow. I'm not moving it because it's but I can share that URL, but it's really not. It's mostly stuff on. Sorry, somebody's just asking me to share that. So give me a minute. But it's stuff on culture, population, migration, none of this stuff. So just give me a minute and I can share that. There you go. So that should be up if you want to kind of go through that on your own. So you might want to familiarize yourself with Karl Sauer and his theory about which plants domesticated where. It's likely something you have in your textbook. Yeah, and just because of copyright, I can't hold this textbook up and show you maps, but just at a minimum, if you're trying to race through your, oh, it didn't come up, Stefania? I thought I shared that. Well, I thought I just saved that URL. It should be saved as a, so I think that's out there. Andrew's asking what book resource do I recommend for reviewing. I think all of them are, if it's 5 Steps to a 5, Cracking the 5, if you're talking about one of those books, you have your texts, AMSCO, any of those I think are just fine. And Kath had said Fiveable. I think that's absolutely right. There's a lot of resources. I also would just recommend, if whatever textbook you have, spend time with, you're not going to reread it, but spend time with the graphics, spend time with the maps so that you understand the patterns they're showing. I think that's one way you can cram a lot, is by taking the visuals. There's one other thing that's always kind of an important piece. So for the original thing, for me to just kind of cram agriculture, the Rubinstein, that's not a text, that's like a supplementary text. What's the title of the book you're asking about, Andrew? I'm not. Yeah, I think the review books, if you're looking for a fast review, and you don't feel confident in your teacher and what your teacher provided you, you can always go to one of those review books. Fiveable has a ton of stuff out there. And join the cram next week. There's like a 4-hour, 6-hour, I think it's 4-hour cram that Amanda's doing the day before the exam. But you do need a cram pass for that. So, but let me talk about von Thunen's model, which is an important part of the agricultural unit. Von Thunen's model looks, I don't have it in this slideshow, unfortunately, but it's imagine just like a target with a bullseye, and that's what his model looks like. And the idea of von Thunen's model, it's based on the price of land, the cost of land, and the cost of transportation, and the perishability of food. Now, all the geographic models that you guys will come across are based on certain assumptions. In this case, the assumptions are that the land is totally equally flat, that there are no physical or natural geographic barriers, so that the distance and the ease of travel between any 2 points on the plane that we're talking about will be equal, which is obviously not really something we have in the world. Maybe somewhat in the Midwest where we have the Great Plains, it might look like this, but to a large degree. But no water, no swamps, no forests, no mountains, no hills, just flat. So it's equally distant. Land is equally fertile everywhere. So it's really these assumptions that are really not very realistic on the world. And von Thunen was trying to understand where different types of agriculture would find themselves located relative to the market. So if you have agricultural goods being produced, they are being produced for a market, and he wanted to understand where would certain types of agriculture land. So in the center, in the bullseye, is the market. This is like the town or the city. And what von Thunen argued is that immediately in the first ring around the city, quite close, you would have what he calls market gardening, and also dairying as a verb, so dairy products. This was, of course, before refrigeration that he's imagining this. This is in the first half of the 1800s that von Thunen was writing. And you can imagine that milk needed to be produced very close to the market, or something like strawberries or tomatoes would need to be produced very close to the market, because these things are very, very perishable. And if you were to try to travel with, a wagon load of strawberries to get to market, or a bunch of milk, that simply was not gonna work if you had far to travel. Now, the world we live in today really throws von Thunen's model in some ways, not every way, but in some ways out the window, because transportation, and particularly refrigerated transportation, is quite a game changer. Outside of this doesn't really relate to our world today, but at that time, wood was very important for fuel. So outside this immediate ring of, and I should say the market gardening, this small ring in the center, is very intensively farmed, which means there's two. I could have said this earlier, but sometimes you see the expression used: intensive farming versus extensive farming. Intensive farming is much more like densely done, where extensive is like it takes a lot more land. So the extensive practices that need a lot of land are going to take place further out. So you've got this inner ring of very intensive market gardening and dairying. Outside this, you have a much wider ring of forest, because at that time they needed wood for fuel. Outside the forest ring, you had like grain production, because you need a lot of land. You just simply wouldn't be growing grain toward the city center or close to town, where land is just way too expensive and you need way too much land to grow a lot of grain. Much better to grow a much more like cost-effective, intensive crop, say like strawberries or tomatoes. And then outside of the grain production is where you would have livestock production, ranching, where again you need lots of land. And theoretically, in that case, you could also, your animals could be the transportation. You could walk them and slaughter them in the town. So you weren't like slaughtering your animals and then having to transport the meat without refrigeration. And then, according to von Thunen, at some point you're just too far from the market that it just simply isn't profitable. So I think that's an important thing to understand. Google it or look in your textbook and you'll see an image of what it looks like to kind of help through that. What else might I add? Talked about the Green Revolution. Let me talk a bit more about the Green Revolution. I think I kind of got interrupted by a question and lost my train of thought. But the third agricultural revolution, or the Green Revolution, is quite controversial because in some ways it's produced a lot, not in some ways, it has produced a lot more food. So this is kind of the plus is it. Oh, thank you. I can bring up Stefania. Thank you. I see that question, so I'll get there. Let me just move this to the question so I don't forget it. And you know what? Why don't I make myself bigger since I'm just talking and not using my slides? The technologies of the Green Revolution were able to produce a lot more food for places that were dealing with food insecurity. And this was with creating new strains of rice, new strains of corn, that simply, and you can look at charts of like the yield per acre, and when you're using Green Revolution seeds or varieties, you can simply produce more of a certain crop. So obviously a great thing if you're dealing with food insecurity and you see places like India and Mexico. Norman Borlaug did his research in Mexico, where just the yield per acre just skyrockets. Again, he's given a Nobel Peace Prize for this, so he's seen as something of a hero in solving some food crisis issues. What happens, though, is with more food simply comes more people, and this is where like Thomas Malthus comes in. There's a question about Malthus that came up earlier, and we see that food production went up and population just kept going up with it. So we've had to continue to kind of keep up with population growth. And how we've done this, the Green Revolution technologies are incredibly chemical intensive, dumping a lot of things. This is sort of the opposite of organic agriculture. So all the environmental issues that have come with that, land degradation, soil degradation, a lot of runoff into water, and other people bring in some economic factors and say, for example, that really, in order to compete in a Green Revolution economy, you need to have the money for the proper tools and the equipment and the fertilizers and the chemicals, which leaves a lot of poor farmers of the world out. So that's kind of one of the criticisms of the Green Revolution. I think it is 2011, but it might be a little worth your time. It's an AP World History DBQ that was on the positive and negative effects of the Green Revolution. So if you read through those documents, you'll sort of see there's even a quote from Norman Borlaug's Nobel Peace Prize, his Nobel address, where he really cautions the world about population growth. And he says, this progress we found has been great, except look out, because population keeps growing and this is just going to be temporary. So Kath, asking me, do I think organic foods are better than GMOs? Better is a really loaded term. So I think, to me, it's really complex. I definitely, if we as a world could grow only organically, I think that would be wonderful. I am not 100% convinced at this point we could do that and feed 7.5 billion and growing people. But I think, with technological improvements, we'd have to find ways to do that. But it's better is a tough one, because GMOs have been able to produce a lot of foods. A lot of people don't like GMOs because this is another drawback of the Green Revolution, is what we've done is we have favored particularly varieties. There was an amazing National Geographic cover article about this some years back that I always assigned in my class. I felt it did an amazing job of kind of covering a lot of the Green Revolution and of the agricultural unit in general. But it looks at the diminishing varieties. So it might be we have chosen a particular variety of apple or tomato to grow. Bananas, I could talk about bananas quite a bit. For a while we were growing a variety called the Gros Michel, also known as the Big Mike, because it shipped well, it was uniform, it looked good for the market, and these were all being grown in Central America primarily at this time and being shipped to the United States, so they had to ship well. They couldn't ripen too fast off the vine because this was before we had as rapid transportation as we have now at the beginning of the 20th century. So we favored particular varieties for growth. And then with this comes what's called monocropping, where you grow nothing but a single crop and often a single variety. So a lot of these are GMOs, Kathy, which you're asking about, like GMO soybeans, GMO corn, and these have been chosen because maybe they're drought resistant. They grow really well. They have high yield per acre. So there are lots of great reasons to grow GMO seeds. One of the drawbacks we're seeing, though, is that they are eliminating genetic diversity. So if you look at apples or tomatoes, we simply are not growing the number of varieties we were even 100 years ago. This National Geographic article has an amazing graphic that compares like a seed catalog from early in the 20th century with one at the end of the 20th century, and you just see, there were 400 varieties of apples, now we're growing 96. There were 700 cabbages, now we're growing 46, whatever. And this is where you're seeing a rise of what are called seed banks right now. The most important one is the Global Seed Vault in Svalbard, which is an island north, I believe, of the Arctic Circle that belongs to Norway, and they've put this seed vault high enough so that if sea levels rise, these seeds will be protected, and they're like deep in a mountain, and we're trying to protect the genetic diversity, because what if in the future environmental changes mean that tomato we stopped growing had the right qualities and traits, that's what we need to grow right now, because I don't know, now it's a lot wetter than it was, and the soil has changed and the conditions have changed. And so a lot of people fear with GMOs that we are taking away a lot of the genetic diversity that we might need in an uncertain environmental future. So it's a complex question, Kathy, but I think it's, certainly I could see a free response question that asks sort of, what are the pros of GMOs? What are the cons of GMOs? So I've just given you some that kind of deals with that. But to simply say like which is better is a tough one. I would want to just say, organic all the way. Better for the earth, better for wildlife, better for our water, our air, all that. And I believe that. But GMOs have certainly led to a lot more food production, so it's tricky. A lot of farmers, again, back to GMO, poor farmers can't compete because you have to often purchase GMO seeds. A company like Monsanto has made their seeds so that they can, that you can't actually, they've patented that genetic material, so farmers are not allowed to store seeds for the following year. They've also created what's called like Roundup Ready soybeans. So they are, they make certain herbicides and pesticides that Monsanto, this is a huge company, agribusiness company. So they'll create chemicals which help you wipe out all the pests and weeds and stuff. And they've created seeds for, say, soybeans that are Roundup ready, which means you can spray that Roundup across your soybean field. Your soybeans can survive it. Everything else dies. So again, maybe that's helpful for the soybean, but not necessarily good for the environment. And again, if you're a farmer that can't afford all that stuff, and we've had stories where some of the genetic material drifts because nature has a way of doing that. And we've had farmers that are unable to even store their own seeds because Monsanto has come and said, your seeds are now our genetic material. We own that. You can't, even though. So we have farmers that are not purchasing or not growing GMO seeds, then get in legal trouble because that genetic material has drifted into their farms. So I think green revolution is a huge topic of agriculture. Von Thunen's model. One of you asked about shifting agriculture and slash and burn. Quick answer, I see Catherine, somebody answered you, or somebody, Stefania, you asked. Yes, open book. So slash and burn or shifting agriculture. Often common in the tropics. We see a lot of this in parts of Africa, parts of South America, like in the Amazon, often in rainforest. And what slash and burn agriculture is where I, as a farmer, cut down all the big trees that I can cut down. And then I light a fire, which burns everything else that's like the brush and underbrush and stuff. So it's kind of a controlled blaze on land that I've cleared. And then the ash, after the fire goes out, the ash is kind of tilled into the soil, which can add a bit to the fertility. So it's basically a way to turn usually rainforest into agricultural land. It's often called shifting cultivation because this land is not meant for farming, and it generally loses its fertility rather quickly. So after a few years, that it's no longer fertile, the farmer just moves and slashes new land. Now, this sounds really awful, I know, in 2020 to think about farming this way. But to be fair, this was a use sustainable, a little loosely here, but this was a sustainable practice that existed in tropical climates and tropical environments for thousands of years. People were using shifting cultivation, and it really wasn't a problem. You have to realize that with Green Revolution technologies and improvements in food, and also like the spread of hygiene and medical and drops in infant mortality, you have situations like in parts of Africa where the population quadrupled in 50 years following World War II. So all of a sudden, to have 4 times as many people trying to do this after, not just 4 times as many people, population had been growing, but when population grows really fast, so this is no longer really seen as a sustainable practice. So that's kind of problematic. So is that good as an answer for you, Stefania? Is that enough of a? So, and again, advantages, disadvantages. Advantages are, people can farm in a place that is forested. The disadvantages, that generally rainforest is not good fertile farming soil. So it's kind of not a sustainable long-term practice in a place with a high population. So, this is maybe something that could come up, but you might look in your text. But, in terms of rural land use, pretty hard to imagine this coming up in a free response, but different ways that land has been divided. And, this text I'm looking at talks about like, grid systems, versus like the long lot, and again had to do with just land use. But we had the township and range system in a lot of the United States and a lot of the Midwest as we gave land away through the Homestead Act and encouraged people to move west. We cut up the land into perfect squares, and you still see this. So it's kind of part of the cultural landscape. You can see farms throughout much of the Midwest. Roads are just on these perfectly straight lines, cutting through farms. Long lots are longer lots that parallel each other, often because every farmer then has access to a road or a river for transportation. So, and then you have the meets and bounds, which is basically where you say, yeah, my land ends at the oak tree, and on the big oak tree, from that oak tree to that fence post and the creek on that side. And that was common, like in the early American settlement, places where being established and farmers were coming. I don't know. Anybody else want to throw any other topics of agriculture out? You know, that's kind of my big, you know, and then we could just get into specific crops, but it's obviously tied to climate, that, you know, the different types of, you know, so I would, you know, look at maps of global agricultural patterns so you can understand like where shifting cultivation is taking place, where livestock production is taking place, which is often through like nomadic or semi-nomadic herding, where, you know, Mediterranean culture, like where I live in California, there's only 5 places in the world that have Mediterranean agriculture. Part of Australia, part of South Africa, part of like Chile and South America, like California and the West Coast, and then the Mediterranean itself, which is why, you know, we grow wine out here and have olives and oranges, and a lot of the same things that grow quite well in the Mediterranean have taken off in California. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'll leave it, but hopefully that worked as a crash course. I know Amanda's doing an overview of agriculture, which unfortunately is not a topic I prepared in my PowerPoint, or I would have just kind of jumped to that. Let me see the questions, if I've missed any questions in the chat. So, Andrew, you asked about Malthusians, so I don't know if you're good with Kathy's question, or Kathy's answer, excuse me. But you're asking about Malthusians versus Neo-Malthusians. So for those that don't know, Thomas Malthus wrote just at the beginning of the 1800s. Was like a minister and an economist, and he was is really associated with being one of the first people to really worry about overpopulation. And what Thomas Malthus believed is he saw population beginning to grow quite a bit in Europe, where he was living and writing, and believed that once our population exceeded our ability to produce food, the crop was going to hit the fan, and this would be really, really problematic. And you'd see things like civil wars and crime and all kinds of chaos going on. There was a free response question some years ago, and I think that I was asked the best way to review. That's the other thing I think would be a fantastic way to review is go to the AP Hug past free response questions and read the answers. Read you know, the many ways you'll get a ton of information through the old free response. So I think that to me is a fantastic way to review. And there is one that asks asks you, the student, to argue both why Malthus was right and why Malthus was wrong, which is an interesting thing to ask people to kind of cover both sides. So check that one out, and you can read kind of what they'll list a bunch of answers both ways. But what we've kind of seen is our ability to grow food has just continued to grow with technology. Was Malthus wrong? Well, I mean, we've kind of managed to feed everybody. There are people that don't have enough to eat on our planet. It is not because we can't produce enough food. It's because of distribution and inequality and more issues like that. There is, I've heard Jared Diamond, people probably have heard of him. He has made an argument that like the Rwanda genocide was actually a result of Malthusian pressures, because on a micro scale in that smaller place, what you saw was traditional ways of dividing farmland among children was fine and sustainable until people, again, population growth just meant I could split my land among my kids, and they could split among their kids, and they could split among their kids, and that's fine until there's just too many darn kids. And then so he makes the argument that was a push on Malthusian pressures led to the Rwandan genocide. Cathet, you're suggesting that Neo-Malthusian theory predicts there's a limit to human population size. I think, most people would predict that we are going to plateau this century. And we'll see. Obviously, now we're all living in a crazy time right now. We don't know how this is going to affect things like population growth and reproduction, and we really don't. If this is going to, discourage people even more from having children or lead to changes in birth control access. We have no idea what this is going to do. Anti-Malthusian states that humans can infinitely increase resource production, whilst Neo-Malthusian state there's a limit. Okay, there you go. So, yeah, I think Malthus is certainly an interesting guy to talk about. Any other questions? Let me scroll through. So this really ended up being largely agriculture, which is fine. I don't think there were any other questions. Just a lot of chat. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I'll just kind of bye, Stefania. I can just kind of go through some basic stuff really quickly, and I'll just kind of fly. And so, Cathet, what do you mean political process? That's a really general term. I'm not sure what you mean by political process. Basics of politically stuff. Okay, so these last two units, again, they're, okay, I'll say yep, that was what I was gonna say. So I'm gonna say the most basic idea of political geography does come down to this idea of state, nation, nation-state, etc. Our world is politically divided right now into states. There's roughly 200 states in the world. So often, political geography is talked about in terms of the state system. Please realize, those of you that live in the United States, I think Americans get a little confused about this, and this can be tricky for us to talk about because when my students traditionally have heard the term state, they think California, Arizona, Florida, New York, Texas. That's what we think of when we hear the word state in the United States. In the sense of political geography, when we say state, we are talking about more often what we would say is a country, I suppose. But this is tricky because I'm gonna define these words in very specific ways. And the truth is we use these words in other ways, colloquially in common speech, but I'm going to give you really specific political geography definitions. So a state in political geography is a territory with its own sovereign government. You'll see different people define, I've seen, I remember one definition that said, a state has 4 attributes. It needs a territory with defined borders. It needs a population in that territory, so it can't be just some uninhabited rock. It needs its own government, and it needs to have political sovereignty. This idea of sovereignty is really key. It means you rule yourself. You are not told what to do by some other entity. This is where, say, in the United States, to call Texas a state or California a state in the political geography is a little funky, because in California, we don't totally have sovereignty. Now, this is very complicated in this COVID-19 moment because we are seeing sort of these battles between what we call the federal government in Washington, D.C. And the state government. It's because we in the United States invented something called federalism, which is a very specific way of dividing up power. Part of why we call ourselves states is because when after we had the revolution, and this is a little bit of U.S. history, I'll do it quickly, but after we were victorious in the American Revolution, Our first government was created called the Articles of Confederation, and we were actually a confederacy of the 13 states. And you can see it in the language that's used, where we say the United States are this, not the United States is, but are. And even you see it in the Declaration of Independence, united is just an adjective. We were a bunch of states that were united. States in the geographic sense of being separate sovereign entities. Battles between sort of the states and the new Confederate government that was supposed to oversee them all got to the point where really, Hamilton fans know this whole battle in the beginning of our country between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And Federalists believed that those individual states were too powerful and that the federal government should be stronger. And they replaced the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution, which invented a system known as federalism, where power is shared between the federal government and the state governments, which, and we're battling it all the time. You hear, people argue for states' rights in the United States, which is, Virginia should be able to decide what we want to do about gun laws, or, Colorado should be able to do what we want when it comes to defining who gets to be married, or California should be able to do what we want when it comes to marijuana laws. And, often states' rights has been associated, of course, with the Civil War, but with, I would say, the political right. And with Donald Trump's election, we've seen kind of a push, and now we see a lot of states asserting their own state authority from the left around, say, immigration issues and wanting to be a sanctuary city. So it's not something you just put right or left in that sense. So that's what a state is. Now, a nation, in the political geography sense, actually refers not to a place, but to a group of people. And a nation of people is united by a common sense of identity. And now we live in a world where many, many people feel their sense of nationness attached to the state where they live in. So a French person from France might feel a really strong sense of, I'm French, and that's who I am. So that's where we get this term, the nation state. And a nation state is where kind of the boundaries of the nation, the group that feels united by a common identity, also happens to inhabit a territory. This is really, really, really unusual in the world, because often our identities, whether you talk about language or religion or ethnicity, they don't correspond to borders, which are often artificial, especially due to migration and just the placing of political boundaries that have often, divided groups or pushed groups together that maybe weren't traditionally groups like that. Again, hard for people in the United States sometimes to wrap their heads around, because we are a nation of immigrants. So in a sense, our nationness, what makes us a nation, defined by a common identity, is the fact that we came from all over. So we're a different kind of country. But you get a place like Iceland, that's maybe one of the more, or Japan, the more nation state type places. But this is a hot topic for sure, and you can find some old free response questions about it. Is kind of, what is a true nation state, and are there any true nation states? And then you have what's called a stateless nation, and this would be the Kurds, although they are kind of now in partial control of some territories. But the Kurds are the largest ethnic group in the world that are not sovereign, don't have their own sovereign territory. They're spread over Iraq and Iran and Syria and Turkey. So that would be a stateless nation, a group of people united, but they don't have their own political territory. It's really an interesting question, Stefania, that you're at, and I'll end with this because time is up, but you're asking, should we stay up to date with everything going on around the world due to the virus? You feel they'll most likely have one that questions like that. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Obviously, the bets are off on the exam, and they've rewritten it to fit this new format, so they could have written anything they could. I think that if they do write something about the virus, it's going to have to tie to the concepts of the course that you've been learning. So, I wouldn't expect it to be something where you're paying attention to the specifics today as much as to be able to apply the concepts you've been learning to the exam. But yeah, absolutely. Population issues and yeah, no, 100% that there could be, but I don't think they're going to do that at the expense of expecting you to show your knowledge of the course content. So they might use it as kind of a vehicle to ask about things. Yeah. So again, a lot of upcoming streams. Good luck on the exam, and yeah, tune into Fireable. You'll see the upcoming streams coming up, and everybody stay safe. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining.